Okay. Yeah. So, Shalom Ubracha, everyone. Welcome to Parshas Bamidbar Shiur. Tonight's Shiur is in memory of my mother-in-law, which her yahrzeit was today. Her name is Chaya Devoy-Relea bas Remoshen-Aftoli. So, may it be for the Luchos of her neshama, name helfen. So we are now in a very special time, as we Yidden are many, many times. But we are now in a time where we are getting, so to say, into the month of Kabbalas Torah, the month of Sivan, Shabbos Mevorchim, benching Rosh Chodesh this week, and Rosh Chodesh would be on Sunday in Yetz Hashem. We all know that the Shloah Kodesh writes, this is now the time that we should daven, that we should have nachas from our kindalach. There's a famous tefillah of the Shloah Kodesh, which has to do with tefillah for good kids, erliche kids, and now is the time, he says, befrat. It's even more powerful this time, which is right before Rosh Chodesh, right before the month of Sivan. In the beginning of this week's Parsha, the Torah says, "Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Bamidbar Sinai leimoy." Hashem spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu in Midbar Sinai, and he tells Moshe Rabbeinu, "Se'ues rosh b'nei Yisrael," you shall count the heads of the b'nei Yisrael. Rashi quotes, "Mitoich chibasam," since Hashem loves Klal Yisrael, he loves the Yidden. Moinem lahem, he counts them b'chol shah, in each time. In other words, periodically, every certain amount of time, Hashem wants the Bnei Yisrael, the Jewish people, to be counted. There's a word from Tzaddikim, just a very powerful word in terms of appreciating the month that we're about to enter. The mitzvah of Sviras Omer, of counting the Omer, the Gemara says, and this is something which is also mentioned in Shulchan Aruch, there's a mitzvah to count weeks, and there's also a mitzvah to count days. So all the time when we count the Svira, we mention both how many weeks we are in the counting of the Omer, and we also mention how many days in the week that we are counting the Omer. So we do both. We do the week and we do the days. So there is a vart from the Chassidish Svarim, a very beautiful way they see things. They say like this: usually, meaning throughout the days of Sfira, all the days till Rosh Chodesh Sivan, we focus mainly on the weeks and the days. When we enter the month of Sivan, every hour in the month of Sivan is so precious, it carries a lot of weight, meaning it has so much value, the actual hours in the month of Sivan as preparation for this Heilige Yom Tov. In other words, from when we enter next week Sunday till the day of Kabbalas Torah, every hour is very precious. And they say that this is what Rashi is hinting. This is a remes, a hint. He says, "Metoichi basan." When do we read Parshas Bamidbar usually? The reading of Parshas Bamidbar is usually either right before Rosh Chodesh Sivan or in the beginning of the month of Sivan, but it's within the week to Kabbalas Torah. So, Mitoichi basan, since these days when we do the reading of Parshas Bamidbar, is so precious, which is basically the days right before Kabbalas Torah, which is the week before Shavuos. Moinin, we count Shah, even the hours. Not only do we count the days and the weeks, we count the hours because it's so precious every hour during this time before Kabbalas Torah. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, he explains why is it that this week's Parsha has to do with counting the Bnei Yisrael. It's a famous word, but it's worthwhile to repeat. And the Chidush HaArim says similar to this. And the Chidush HaArim, he says like this. There is a halacha in Shulchan Aruch. Davar shebeminyan, something which is minyan, which is counted, which is chashav, which has a certain specialness. Loi batel, it doesn't become batel when it regarding the halachis, when things become, once it's mixed with other things, it basically takes away the isser, the problematic part that fell into a big pot. But a davar shebeminyan, something which is special, counted, loy batel, it doesn't become batel. Says the Chidush HaArim, he says, you know why we read Parshas Bamidbar? Rabbi Moshe Feinstein says very similar. You know why we read Parshas Bamidbar right before Shavuos? So many times, this part, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein stresses more than the Chidush HaArim. So many times, we forget that we are really special. We think to ourselves, there's so many Gedolim, there's so many Rosh Hashivas, there's so many Yidden out there. My davening, my learning will make a dent in Klal Yisrael, will change the world. Says Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, Parshas Bamidbar, where Moshe Rabbeinu had to count the Bnei Yisrael, proves and shows and it demonstrates every single Yid counts. So every Yid, when you prepare for Shavuos, your mindset, says that Moshe Feinstein, should be, I'm not preparing myself as, obviously we have to be part of Klal Yisrael, part of the entire Yiddish nation, but you should focus that your individual Kabbalas HaTorah this year, Tafshin Pei Vav, would matter. And your Kabbalas HaTorah could be the Kabbalas HaTorah, accepting the Torah and putting in the koyach into davening and learning, could be the turning point where things will turn around for Klal Yisrael and things will be way better. This is now the time that we do this reading in order for us to appreciate that every single Yid matters. Appreciating the days before Kabbalas HaTorah. There's the Ran. The Ran in the Droshes. The Ran made a sefer, Droshes the Ran, a famous sefer, where he says a lot of fascinating things. As we know, the Ran is one of the Rishonim, over 1,000 years ago. He asks an interesting kasha. We know, it says in the Torah, on Parshas Yisrael, Vayisu me'Refidim, the Yidden traveled from the place called Refidim, Vayachnu, and they rested Bamidbar Sinai, in the desert of Sinai. Chazal, a very famous Chazal, when it says Vayisu Merifidim, it's Merifyon Yedayim, from the laziness of not being zealous, not being excited. That's where we traveled away. We took ourselves away, which means that we put our acts together to be excited, to be motivated for Kabbalas HaTorah. But the way that Gemara expresses it is, and there's another point that I need to add. It says, why did Amalek come? Amalek came to hold war with the Yidden because the Yidden were rifyoin, they were lazy. They didn't have this zealous, this slahavos, this very uplifting feeling. So therefore, Amalek came. But the way the Gemara expresses it, they were rifyon yedayim midivrei Torah. They were lazy. They were basically, they were not excited when it came to Torah. Asks the Ran, the Chidush HaArim, one of the Rishonim, he says, what Torah? It's still before Torah. We didn't get to Torah yet. Shavuos is the time when we got to Torah. It's before the Torah. Amalek, the war with Amalek happened before the Torah. So what is this? What is this Rifya Yedayim? We were lazy. We were not excited with Torah. So listen to what the Heiliger Ran says. He says a fascinating idea. He says like this. He says, when Moshe Rabbeinu met Hashem in the desert, before Yitzias Mitzrayim, and Hashem told Moshe, I want you to take the Yidden out of Mitzrayim, and Moshe Rabbeinu was arguing with Hashem for 7 days. Moshe Rabbeinu said, why is it that the Yidden are worthwhile to be taken out of Mitzrayim? And one of the things Hashem said, because there will come a time where in 50 days, as that's what the Ramban says, in 50 days after Yetzias Mitzrayim, after the leaving of Mitzrayim, they'll get the Torah. They'll receive the Torah. Says the Ran, you know what Moshe Rabbeinu did? He gave over this information for the Yidden, and he told the Yidden, I want you to get ready that once we go out of Mitzrayim, you should count the days till the 50th day. Because we see, Moshe Rabbeinu said, we see that Hashem was very much looking forward for that day, which is Kabbalas HaTorah. So Moshe Rabbeinu says the Ran, he says, Ulai, maybe Moshe Rabbeinu was the first one who brought in this idea of counting the Sphira. He was the one who told the Yidden, I want you to count every single day till the day of Kabbalas HaTorah. And you know what the Yidden were doing then, says the Ran? They were working on themselves, excitement to receive the Torah, because they didn't have the Torah yet. So the 50 days from when they left Mitzrayim till the first Shavuos, to the first Kabbalas HaTorah, to the first year, you know what they did? They actually counted the Sphira, which is the excitement, feeling the excitement, the liveliness that they'll be receiving the Torah. To a certain extent, they decreased this excitement. And that's when Amalek came. When it was Rifi Yadayim and HaTorah, they didn't have the actual Torah, says the Ram. But they had this counting towards Kabbalas HaTorah, which was adding excitement more and more. And this is what they were actually losing. And that's when Amalek comes. Says the Ram, you know what we see from this? We see from this such a powerful message, that these days that we're preparing ourselves towards Shavuos are days that our focus should be excitement, feeling the excitement, being excited that we're Yidden, being excited that we have, that Hashem gave us the Torah and we're able to be part of Am Yisrael. Now, the Me'ori Naim, he writes in his Sefer, every year when it comes Shavuos, we receive the Torah again. It's not that we received the Torah over 3,500 years ago. No. Every single Shavuos, there is a fresh Kabbalas HaTorah. And according to the Chidush HaRim, all the Torah that a person will learn for the entire upcoming year, from Shavuos, from this Shavuos to the next Shavuos, why would a person understand a Blat Gemara? Why would a person appreciate Chumash and Rashi? Why would a person appreciate Divrei Torah? It all has to do with Shavuos. The more we invest in these days before Shavuos, the more we put in the excitement in these days for the upcoming Shavuos, the more we would be ready for the Kabbalas HaTorah, and the more we are ready for Kabbalas HaTorah, we have more potentials to be successful from this year to the next year with the Torah. So we have a lot going on during this time of the year, both now before Kabbalas HaTorah and obviously Shavuos itself, which is obviously a very important time. I would like to share with the Olam a very powerful Orach Chaim HaKadosh, and just elaborate a little bit on this, which is something that we could learn a lot, which has to do with what I just said. The Orach Chaim HaKadosh in Parshas Yisro, where the Torah talks about Kabbalas HaTorah, and the first pasuk, where the Torah talks about the Bnei Yisrael, it says, Vayachnu Bamidbar Sinai. They rested in the desert of Sinai. The next pasuk says, Vayisu Merifidim they traveled from Refidim, and Vayachnu, they camped in Bamidbar Sinai. So the famous Kasha, before we had already that they camped in Sinai. Why is it that it says again, Vayisu Merifidim, that they traveled away from Refidim and they came to Har Sinai? So the Chaim HaKadosh, which has to do with what I said before from the Ram, he said, this pasuk, the second pasuk in Kapitel Yotes, where the Torah talks about, in Perik Yotes, where the Torah talks about Kabbalas HaTorah, the second pasuk tells us the three most important things that we should be successful when it comes Shavuos to accept the Torah. He says the first thing is Vayisu Merifidim, which is going away from the laziness, being excited, not feeling this like I would chas v'shalom love to stay in bed a whole day. Being excited to be a Yid, feeling like Moida ani lefanecha shechzartu bi nishmasi, I'm a Yid, and I'm able to daven, I'm able to learn, I'm able to do mitzvahs. The number one thing for a person to keep in mind, in order for a person to have a good, successful year with Torah and mitzvahs and ma'asim tovim, is vayisu merifidim, to work, to put in the effort. How and which way can I remove myself that I shouldn't be lazy, I shouldn't chas v'shalom fall into this rifyoid, into the laziness of not feeling excited for Torah mitzvahs. Therefore, says the Heilige Beis HaHayin, the Kalina Rebbe, he builds it on our Ramban. The Ramban says in Parshas V'eschanon, there's a mitzvah in the Torah, Voidata, we should always remember, as we say in the Sheish Schiris and the 6 rememberings, we have to remember Matan Torah every single day, and we have to give it over to our children and to our grandchildren, at Soif Kol HaDoros, that we were once by Har Sinai, and Hashem gave us the Torah. Says the Ramban, not only do we have to give over the actual happening of Matan Torah, we also need to demonstrate the way Matan Torah was given. It was given b'koilos u'barakim, with thunder and lightning, u'metoicha eish. It was given from fire. There was fire coming out from Har Sinai. This is part of what we need to do in order to give over to the next generation, when we have, with the mitzvah that we have, to give over Matan Torah to the future generations and to remember Matan Torah every single day. This is the Ramban. So Ramban explains that when we give over the mitzvah to our kindlach, it's not only the actual mitzvah, but it's also demonstrating everything that it entailed, the actual Kabbalas HaTorah. Says the Heilige Beis HaHayin, why is it so important that we tell our children how and what how Matan Torah was? That it was koilos ubrokim. It was so much going on. Why is this so important? Says the Heilige Beis HaHayin, you know why? If you want Klal Yisrael to exist, you want the generations to go from one generation to another, it should be Doiros of Erlich Gute Yiddische Kinderlach. It all has to do with the excitement and with the bren, with a burning for Yiddishkeit. If we do Yiddishkeit in a very modern way, not in an exciting way, it doesn't go over as well to our children. Says the Beis HaHayin, that's why the Ramban says we need to tell our children Matan Torah was given with fire. Torah, you want to receive the Torah? With fire, that's the way we are able to be mekabel the Torah HaKdosha. And as we all know, and I mentioned it already a few times in Shiur, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein was once asked, how is it that we see certain mishpachas, certain families, the children and grandchildren stayed Erlach, being in America, and the Am Reika being in America so many years, over 150 years. And we see, unfortunately, many families that they disappeared. And the way Rabbi Moshe puts it was, it all had to do with the krechts. If when a tati came home Friday with a pink slip. And he was excited. And he said, whoa, I got another pink slip. Gewaldig. I'll be able to keep Shabbos. It went over to the children. It went into a deep place into the kinderlach. And they said, whoa, this is something we want to continue. But if the tati came home and it was with a krechts, oi, I lost my job, oi. The children didn't want the oi. They were not interested. We all know this. And it was actually a yid over here. I said it then, but it's so profound that I want to say it again. There was a yid over here in Square. His name was Rabbi Rosenberg. He was nifter when he was 102 years old. He was nifter over 30 years ago. Actually, 25 years ago. He in his sukkah, it was known, everyone knew that in his sukkah there are pink slips from all the jobs that he was basically called off. He lost his job. All the jobs that he lost, every Friday, he kept these slips and he hung it up in the sukkah. It was no sukkah. It was the decoration for his heilige sukkah. And his children were very, very, erlich. So the excitement, that's what the Ramban says. We need the excitement. We need the eish, the fire. The fire, that goes over to from one generation to another. One of the very interesting things that we see over here, that we find by Matan Torah, we know there were two Luchos. There were Luchos Rishonos, the first Luchos. Unfortunately, the first Luchos were broken, and then we were Zoiche to the Luchos Shnias, to the second Luchos. The Gemara, a very famous Gemara, which everyone knows. Why was the Luchos Rishonos broken? Says the Gemara, because the first time the Luchos was given was Bepumbi, was an open, a lot of people saw by Matan Torah. So therefore, the first Luchos, there was an Ayin Hara that was Shoilit, Soizak the Gemara, was an Ayin Hara that had a power over it, and it was broken. The second Luchos that was given B'tzina, it was given in a hidden place, in a hidden way. Therefore, it wasn't such a big tararam. Therefore, it didn't break. Asks the Sfas Emes, if in a tznius way is better, why wasn't the Luchos Rishonos given in a tznius way? Hashem could have given the Luchos Rishonos, the first Luchos, in a hidden way. It could have been right away this way. Why did it have to be? The first Luchos was in a public way. It was a very open way, and then the second Luchos was in a hidden way. Why? Says the Sfas Emes in the name of his deity, the Chedusha Harim, you know why? It was only, the second Luchos was able to be B'tzin in a hidden way only because the first Luchos was in a very big way. He says, if we want to be able to serve Hashem in a tzniyazik way, in a hidden way, in other words, a person can't become a tzaddik nister overnight. You want to be a hidden tzaddik? First, you got to be like everyone else. You have to daven 3 times a day, and you should shake by davening, and you should put in the energy into davening. You should learn in front of other people, put in the energy. Whoa! When you work on yourself, after doing it in a fahesia, in a public way, then you could work upon yourself that you serve Hashem on a very high level, nister, hidden. But it all has to start with nigla in a public way, which is basically similar to what the Ramban says, meaning in order for a person to be able to connect the Torah mitzvahs, it has to be in a stark way, which his body should also be part of it. It can't be like, start with the nista part. There's a famous Tosfos, a famous Gemara actually in Masechta Shabbos. The Gemara in Masechta Shabbos says, Kofa aleim har kigigis. Hashem took the Har Sinai, when it says they were standing under the mountain, famous Chazal. Hashem took the mountain and he puts it on Klal Yisrael. And he says, if you accept the Torah, good. Otherwise, this will be the place you'll be buried. Tosfos, famous Kasha, asks, the Yidden said already Nasa v'nishma. They said already Nasa v'nishma, that we're willing to do and we're willing to listen. If so, why Harkigiyas? Why is it that Hashem takes the mountain and says, if you accept the Torah, they accepted the Torah already? So Tosfos says a very interesting answer. Tosfos says, Hashem was concerned that maybe after all the thunder and the lightning and the fire, all the very, overwhelming different things that was happening on Har Sinai, maybe the Yidden would have second thoughts. Maybe it's too overwhelming, it's too much. I'm not willing to accept a Torah that's so overwhelming. So therefore, the mountain had to be put on top of their head. So comes again this Vasemes and he asks, if so to say the reason why Hashem had to put the mountain over their heads was because of the Eish, the fire and the thunder and the lightning. So don't have the thunder and the lightning, don't have the Eish, so you don't need to have the mountain on top of them. Because they said Nasa v'nishma. Says the Sfas Emes, no. Torah doesn't go without Eish. Eish is a have to. Eish, Torah goes together with Eish. You can't say no Eish. If you say no Eish, then you're saying no Torah, chas v'shalom. Torah with Eish go together. So it had to be, if it's Kabbalas HaTorah, accepting the Torah, it had to be with Eish. And there's no other choice. So therefore, Hashem took the mountain that they shouldn't go back on what they said, Nasa v'nishma. But the idea again is, Eish is so important. Fire is important. Another thing that the Orach Chaim HaKadosh points out when it comes to Kabbalas HaTorah, which is also a very famous thing, he says, Vayichan Sham Yisrael neged Ahar. The Bnei Yisrael, the Yiddish Kindalach, rested opposite the mountain. Very famous Rashi. Vayichan is singular. It says Vayichan, like one person. Very famous. It doesn't say Vayachanu, and they rested. Teaching us, they were there, ki ish echad belev echad. Belev echad. The entire Klal Yisrael was resting in a very achdus way. In a unity way. Says the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, this is one of the very important things for Kabbalas HaTorah. If a person wants to thrive and steig in Torah, we need achdus. Achdus is a very fundamental yesod in when it comes to Kabbalas HaTorah. Now, interestingly, the Vilna Gaon says, if a person wants to know what the author of a book, what the whole idea of the author of a certain book is, what you do, you open up the front, you open up the first few pages, and you zoom through, and then you look at the end of the book, and you also go through quickly, and then you get a glimpse what this mechaber, this author, is all about. He says, lahavdil, when it comes to the Torah Hagdosha, it's the same thing. If we want to know what Kaviyachol the Rebbeinu Shalom is all about, meaning what is one of the most important things for the Rebbeinu Shalom, open up the Chumash in the beginning and in the end. Look what it says in the beginning of the Torah and look what it says in the end of the Torah. And the Chachomim, the Chazal, teach us the beginning of the Torah is gemilas chasadim. The end of the Torah is gemilas chasadim. In the beginning of the Torah, we see kindness. We see Hashem's kindness, which is basically when Hashem was involved in Shalom Bayis, as it says in the Medrash. Hashem created Chava in a way that Adam Arisha should respect Chava. And Hashem Kavyochol prepared, he got Chava ready in a way that Adam should be interested in Chava. And this is basically gemilas chasadim, shalom bayis, bringing peace, harmony amongst husband and wife is gemilas chasadim. So the beginning of the Torah talks about Hashem creating this unity, this ahava v'achva v'sholem v'reyes between Adam and Chava. And the end of the Chumash, it says Hashem buried Moshe Rabbeinu, which is the mitzvah of Kvuras HaMeis, which is another mitzvah that Kavyochel Hashem did on his own, the burial of Moshe Rabbeinu. So the beginning and the end of the Torah gives us the idea of what the Mechaber, the one who put together the Heilige Torah, which is the Rebbeinu Shalom, what is important for the Rebbeinu Shalom? Important for the Rebbeinu Shalom is that we think about one another, that we do gemilas chasadim with one another. We're not constantly only focused on ourselves. We go out of ourselves. Instead of being inward, we're outward. We see how we can help one another, how we could make Klal Yisrael a better Klal Yisrael, how we could bring simcha amongst Yidden and Klal Yisrael. This is Torah. And this is what Hashem is saying in Kabbalah Satoira. Vayichan Shom Yisrael. You wanna get ready for Torah. Getting ready for Torah is feeling, appreciating, being like one unit, being like Vayicha, like oneness. There's a very interesting medrash. The medrash says, why do we read Megillas Rus on Shavuos? There's so many reasons. Now the very common reason, because Rus had a great-grandson, David HaMelech. David HaMelech passed away in Shavuos. Shavuos is a time, a Kabbalah Satoira, where we are now, like king, like we are like the king. We have this kingliness. But there's an amazing medrash, which is beautiful, explaining why we do Megillas Rus on Shavuos. And the medrash is exactly what was just said. The medrash says like this: Megillas Rus has no halachis. Lo yisur v'lo heter. There is no halachis in Megillas Rus. You won't find any mitzvah, maybe a hidden mitzvah of yibum, but nothing open. No mitzvahs in Megillas Rus. What do you find, says the Medrash in Megillas Rus? The beginning and the end teaches you the importance of gemilas chasadim. How? Says the Medrash, in the beginning of Megillas Rus, the Torah, the Navi teaches us, it tells us that Elimelech, unfortunately, being this very wealthy man, instead of staying in Eretz Yisrael, he removes himself and he goes to Beis Lechem. Why? Because it was too overwhelming for him, since there was a famine or hunger, and people were constantly coming to him because he was very wealthy. So unfortunately, in the beginning of the Megillas Rus, there is a very sad beginning. He left, and he wasn't into gemilas chasadim nebach. Unfortunately, he was nifter, his two sons were nifter, Naomi stayed all by herself, and things didn't end so well. Says the Medrash, let's go to the end of Megillas Rus. At the end of Megillas Rus, we find a fascinating story. What? Gemilas chasadim, the power of gemilas chasadim. At the end of Megillas Rus, there was a very famous tzaddik named Boaz. Boaz cared for a certain lady, even though she was obviously a lady that came from a different nation. Her name was Rus, but he cared for her. And he told her, every day you come to my fields and you could take whatever you need. And he cared also for who? For Nami. Caring for both of them, Rus and Nami. What was the outcome? He was Zoiche. Rus they got married. Rus, Boyas and Rus. And who comes out from them? David, Melech, Yisrael, Chai V'Kayim, the Heilige David HaMelech. And the entire Malchus based David comes out from who? From Boyas. Why? He went out of his way. Caring for another person. We read Megillas Rus as the Medrash in Shavuos to basically to teach us and to install in us this thought. What is one of the most important things that we need to focus on? Going out of our way, thinking about another Yid. How could we do some chesed for another Yid? And that's what the entire Shavuos is all about. Just to finish up the Shiur with one more very powerful idea. The Heilige Mabit, he writes in his Sefer, he says like this. He says, we have two Luchos, right? On one of the Luchos, two stones. On one of them was all the 10 commandments, 5 commandments that has to do, the 5 dibros that have to do with Hashem and with us, the first 5. Anochi Hashem Olikecha, I am Hashem, Lo Yilocho Elim Acherim, you shouldn't worship other idols. The first 5 have to do with Hashem, between us and Hashem. The second 5 has to do between one Yid and another. Lo Yisirtzach, Lo Yisinov, Lo Yisanim Riyacha. Don't do things that are not appropriate. It has to do with us, with Hashem and us, with one Yid and another. Says the Mabit, it's in his own Chiddush, he says like this. We see, this part is still not as Chiddush, but he says, we see the first 5 that has to do with Hashem, there's actually quite a few words that are written on the Luchos. So it must be that it was small letters on the Luchos. On the second luach, on the second stone, which has to do with us and our friends, it says 2 words, listen off. Right? The first stone says, a long. Second one is very short, very brief. Not all of them, but most of them. So he said it has to be that the words on the second one, which is between one chav and another, the letters were big, was stretched. He says, otherwise it doesn't look nice. So it must be that Hashem stretched the words and it was big words. Lo yisirtzach, lo yisinov. You know why? Says the Mabit, because for Hashem is more important, this is fascinating, more important that one Yid cares for another more than the caring between us and Hashem. Can you imagine? It's more important for the Rabbi Shalom that Klal Yisrael should love one another and respect one another. Therefore, when it comes to the letters that has to do between us and our friends, it's big letters that we should see it from far, that we shouldn't not see it. Hashem, also important, but it's smaller letters. So again, the same idea of the importance of Ben Adam L'Chaveiroi. The Rabbi Shalom should help us that we should all be soiche to get into the Shavuos with a good mindset, with a positive mindset, with an exciting mindset, appreciating one another, appreciating one Yid and another Yid, appreciating who we are, appreciating the Torah that we have, and we should all be zoiche to moire dige yomtiv, to chag kosher v'sameach, and we should be zoiche very soon. We should hear the shofar of Mashiach Tzidkenu b'mheira b'yameinu. Amen.